We've got an intro.
Okay. Hello, Daniel. Are we starting?
All right, let's start the intro. The intro starts now.
This is the intro. And welcome back to Oh No.
What an intro.
That was great.
Yeah, this is an intro.
Why don't we use that?
That's the new intro, everyone.
Do we?
Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back, everybody. One and all. Today is a Sunday. Fantastic. We did the old switcheroo. We did the old Kansas City shuffle.
Yeah.
You went in for a Thursday, back to back Danny Burke. That's gonna be me.
If you haven't seen that one,
You should definitely check it out.
It's called The Last Laugh.
And it was horrifying. I'm still a little bit perturbed by it, actually.
Yeah, me too,
I
actually.
keep kind of seeing the scream.
Don't spoil this.
Oh yeah.
No,
But yeah, if you're watching this, you've probably seen that one anyway. Anyway, today it is my turn. And I have a story that I'm incredibly excited to share with you all, but particularly Mr. Danny Burke, so I'd love to see his reaction.
Give us the title. Let's get on with it.
The title to this week's episode is The Family Soup.
That's really good.
I do like soup. You won't like, maybe you will. Anyway, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Let's begin.
Emma hated the summer holidays. It's not that they were boring or too long or too hot. In fact, Emma loved the thought of spending 6 weeks out in the glorious British sunshine, getting lost in a forest with her friends, kicking up dirt and scuffing her knees, and not getting home till sundown to do it all over again. No, that wasn't it. She wished that was it. Emma hated the summer holidays because every time mid-July rolled around, her parents would book the exact same trip that they had ever since she could remember. A countryside retreat out in the Peak District, out in the middle of nowhere with nothing but large hills and back roads and cobbled hedgerows to a rickety old house that stank like covered up mould and damp towels. Nothing to do but walk around for an entire day, foraging for mushrooms and herbs and roots deep in the earth, and look at mud and endless fields of mud. And what made it even worse was that it wasn't just Emma's parents she had to go with, but her entire extended family. All 9 of them, plus Emma and her parents made 12. 3 uncles, 4 aunts and 2 cousins, both of which were twice as old as Emma, had nothing in common and rarely even spoke to her the entire trip, save to ask her to pass the butter during mandatory family dinner or to leave the room when the adults were talking. And that was the worst part of it all, family dinner. When every Sunday for 6 Sundays straight, the meal served up would always be the strangest, most revolting thing that Emma had ever tasted, made from dirty old ingredients found out in the wild. The family soup. Her mum and her aunts would take turns making it. They all had their own secret variation of the recipe, and each one was just as bad as the other. It was vile, and none of the others seemed to have the guts to tell them just how bad it was. In fact, they'd eat it up greedily without a word, and even make out that they enjoyed it. Just the thought of it would make Emma shiver and shake her head. She dreaded the thought. They'd even invite some of the locals over to share in a bowl or two. Quickly though, as it always did, the last day of school soon rolled around when Emma said goodbye to her friends and then dawdled home as slowly as she could. She found her parents on the driveway already packing the car with suitcases and anoraks and double pairs of hiking boots. "Come on, Petal," her dad shouted. "We better get on the road. If we make good time now, we'll probably skip the traffic and get wheels down before the rest of the after-school madness. You excited?" "No, Dad." "Well, why would I be excited?" replied Emma. "Can't we just stay home this year?" Her dad pulled a face and tutted as he folded a spare tarp into a gap in the back seat. Emma's mum trotted out of the house, already dressed in her waterproofs with her boots tightly laced, a dark brown leather satchel tucked in her other arm. "Listen, sweetheart, you know how important this trip is to all of us. Your mum and her sisters have been going on this trip since before they were your age. This place is special. This is the house that Granny passed down to them before she passed, for all of them to share. Who knows? Maybe it'll be yours one day too. And besides, I think your mum's got a little surprise for you this year. You're 13 now, sweet. And you know what that means. Her dad ruffled her hair and nudged her towards the car. Emma sighed and threw her bag inside. Fine. But next year, can we please just go to Butlins? Before Emma knew it, they were on the road and were quickly hurtling down narrow country lanes, past winding rivers, narrow creeks and endless rolling green hills. Her dad was right, they'd skipped all of the traffic and were spared the pain of sitting in jam-packed rows on the motorway with the rest of the normal people, choking in fumes, probably on their way to Centre Parks or some other summer holiday that didn't involve sitting in a dilapidated old house with 11 adults that probably didn't even like her. Just as it was getting dark, Emma and her parents pulled into the narrow dirt path entrance, and the car sputtered its way up the bumpy old road. The rest of them were already there, 4 cars parked neatly in the driveway. The kitchen light was on, and Emma could see the silhouettes of her extended family flickering like dancing flames in the window. She closed her eyes and sighed. Another 6 weeks of sitting in the corner, doing nothing and speaking to no one. Great. When Emma creaked open the kitchen door though, the room dimmed to a quiet silence. Her dad paced behind her, rolling the suitcase awkwardly, and her mum stood in a quiet calm, the brown leather satchel still tucked under her arm. The faces of her aunts, uncles and cousins greeted her, apprehensively waiting for Emma to step into view, and then suddenly, and without warning, they interrupted into a cheer. "Emma!" they all cried. "Oh, sweetheart, it's so good to see you. Look how big you've got since last year." Her uncles ruffled her hair and patted her on the shoulder the exact same way her dad would. Her 2 cousins slid up to her and nudged her, more indignant than they'd ever been, the most attention they'd ever shown her in all of her 13 years at the house in the Peak District. Her aunt stood at the back, smiling at Emma with a quiet compassion. Strangely enough, they looked proud. It was all too much for Emma to take in. She didn't know what to say. What was so different about this year? Why were they acting so weird? And then Emma felt her mother pace behind her as she lifted the brown leather satchel that she'd been carrying and placed it gently on the kitchen table. She looked up at Emma and smiled. Emma caught a glance at her father as he beamed. "I told you, Petal, your mum has got a surprise for you this year." "You're 13 now, Emma," her mother said softly. "And in our family, that's a very important time in a young girl's life. This year, you'll be making the very first Anreith of the season, and all of your aunts are here to teach you." Emma bowed her head. She felt like tutting and sighing as she usually would have, but there was an odd impetus to her mother's words. She could almost feel the importance that had been placed in the room. She could almost cut it with a knife. Her mother reached down into her brown leather satchel, and with her left hand she produced a dark, large stone. Emma could almost see the light dissipating from its surface, as if it was absorbing the very heat of the room. She couldn't stop herself, and she held her hands out, spread and cupped, and then her mother placed the stone firmly on her flesh. "With this, we make Anreith," said her mother, "your very first batch. And this stone is yours to give to those that feast." Emma caught the gaze of her aunts. They were smiling, their eyes swimming in the low light of the kitchen. They were nodding forwards as if waiting for Emma to reply, but for a brief moment, she had no idea what to say. But then a calm wave poured over her, and in that instant, all of her childhood indifference to her family's summer holiday trip washed away. I don't know how to make it," she said. Her mother grinned coyly. "That's why we're here, Petal," she said. The next day, Emma spent an entire morning and afternoon scouring the fields and the cobbled copses of the Peak District with her aunts and mother, pulling up thick angelica roots and fennel from the crooks and crannies of the valley. They found wild garlic growing in thick bulbs and bouquets and bushes of mustard greens that smelled exactly as they sounded. It was hard work, but strangely enough, Emma enjoyed it. Her father and her uncles had taken her 2 cousins on a trip through the many walking trails that snaked their way across the valley. They told Emma that same morning that it was probably best that the men kept far away while she was learning the ways of the family soup. By the early evening, her mother had filled an entire wicker basket with bundles of shallots and thin crispy carrots with bulbous green heads and bright flourishes. They'd even managed to pilfer a few small potatoes that had grown wild in the hedgerows, offshoots from when the farmers had sown their seeds too wide. As the quiet dark of the evening slowly pulled its reach across the sky, Emma sat with her mother and her aunts on a small stack of rocks overlooking the house. "That should be enough by now, I'm sure," said her mother. Her aunts nodded and grumbled in agreement. "There's just one ingredient left," she added. As they made their way back toward the house, Emma could make out her father and uncles trudging past a row of trees in the distance. They were laughing, slapping each other on the back as they slowly got closer. Strangely though, there was another figure with them. A young man, it seemed, in a bright yellow jacket and a brown hat. As they made their way toward the house, Emma's mother put her hand in her pocket and pulled out the dark, heavy stone. She held it firmly with her palms clasped tight around it, and her mother gently nodded her head. "Looks like we've got a guest for dinner," said her mother. "That we have," said her father. "This is Alex. We met him out on the trail. He's been solo camping for a few weeks across the valley." Alex stepped forward and Emma's mother gently nudged her daughter toward him. He was smiling and laughing with her cousins, and he turned to face Emma. "Only if I'm not intruding," said Alex. "These lot said something about stone soup, and I figured I couldn't turn down the chance to taste a bit of old British tradition." He chuckled awkwardly and stepped forward. And right then, it all fell into place. She felt it. This was Emma's moment. This was her time to play her part. A part that she'd never before had the chance to play, instead of being shrugged aside and left to quietly ponder alone in the corner. She could feel the eyes of her family bearing down on her as Alex creased his eyebrows at the uncomfortable silence. Emma held out her palm, and in it, she clutched the stone. And then she remembered the words that she'd heard her aunts and mother speak every year, and in one sharp breath, she said, "This here's the stone for you to take, and the stone makes the soup, and the soup we make, and we'd love to have you for dinner." Emma could see her father proudly nodding as Alex awkwardly laughed and reached forward to grab the stone, playing along in the strange make-believe. She could see her uncles and cousins grinning ear to ear, and behind her she felt the comforting grip of her mother's hand on her shoulder. Alex chuckled as he faced Emma, holding the stone in one hand, and as he politely bowed his head, Emma saw the joy in her father's face slip comfortably into a cold savagery. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a long, thin, bone-handled blade. But before the young man Alex could even realize, her father had stepped behind him and slipped the thin knife across his throat, and the polite thanks he was about to offer became guttural croaks and choked buffets of rushing air as a bright collar of blood spilled out across his throat and dripped down into the soil. "You did great, Petal," her father said, wiping the knife clean on a thick linen rag. "You did absolutely great." The next evening, as the warm summer Sunday had came to its end and the dim light of the kitchen had spread its way across the room, Emma sat proudly beside her mother and her father at the centerpiece of the table. In the middle, a huge steaming pewter pot of the family soup perched itself as Emma's aunts and uncles and cousins hurriedly passed bowls and bread around to each member of the family. Emma's mother proudly stood up, lifting a ladle from the pot as she spooned the rich reddish-brown broth into bowl after bowl. One by one, she passed them around the table, and lastly, she spooned a bowl for Emma. She pursed her lips and smiled from ear to ear, resting her palm proudly on her daughter's shoulder. I think this may be the best one yet.
Gruesome. Gruesome, Mr. Finch. That was gruesome. And you know it.
Yeah.
Gory.
Yeah.
And dark.
Yeah.
And great. Yeah, that was great. That was... I could see parts of it coming, like with the killing him and stuff. And that made it even worse. I think it wouldn't have shocked me as much actually, but it was a surprise. You know what I mean? Because he's just like...
I didn't want the reveal to be the reveal. Do you know what I mean? I wanted the reveal to slowly come. And I wanted the horror to be in the slow realization of what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're witches.
Maybe. This was my attempt at trying to write a story that wasn't in the Jack universe, but perhaps still is.
It is,
Yeah.
Yeah. I got mad witch vibes from them.
Yeah, they are.
Dad was actually the creepiest.
I know.
Like I thought, as soon as I was like, all right, witch, and then I thought we weren't going to see the guys again. I'm like, they're off for the walk. You just sort of got rid of the men folk.
Yeah.
And then Dad came back and he was like so creepy.
Yeah.
And speaking the same way.
Yeah.
And you established that with the whole petal thing, and he's just like, oh, he was creepy.
Yeah.
The rest of them I can almost forgive them because they're witches. I'm like, what?
Exactly.
He reminds me of, you know, What We Do in the Shadows. You know, the one who like helps them.
Yes, the familiar.
The familiar. He reminds me of
that's
like the familiar.
Really, I'm really stoked that you said that actually, because my intention, we limit ourselves in the sense that we only have 1,500, 2,000 words to tell a story.
Yeah.
So like, even if we have an idea, sometimes it's difficult to translate. But my intention was for the men to be the familiars.
Yeah.
For them to do the wet work, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, he seemed like that.
Yeah.
He seemed like that.
Okay, good.
He seemed like it even before that. There's something about him doing all like, you know, the heavy lifting or like struggling along with the suitcase and all that kind of stuff. Like, you know, it could be just sort of old-fashioned dad vibes, but they could also be like, you're just here to serve us, you know what I mean? And he knows that and he loves it.
Yeah.
Which is like really creepy.
It's the joy in it, right?
Yeah. Ooh.
That's why I didn't want to give away the gender of the two cousins, but they were both male.
Yeah.
But I didn't want them to be anything. You know, I wanted the mother and the father to be very separate, but I also wanted the aunts and the uncles to be almost two separate characters, right?
Yeah.
But I felt like it also wouldn't have been the same if it was just like, oh, 4 family members sitting around. Like, it makes it so much more horrific that there's so many people complicit in what they're doing.
Yeah. But still related.
Still related.
Yeah. And they all just sort of fall into line.
Yes.
You know, there's none that... And, you know, because she seems like the black sheep of the family. She seems like, well, whatever's... I saw that, you know, right at the start, when you're painting the picture of the soup and stuff, and they all liked it, I'm like, they're in on something, and she's not. Yeah. She's the outsider. But it's just that she hadn't come of age yet, you know. That was gory as hell. There was a quote I saw the other day that wasn't a direct reference to this, but it reminded me of it. It sort of takes on a whole new meaning, which is tradition is just peer pressure from the dead.
I think I've seen that before, but that is fantastic.
Yeah.
That is so good. And it is.
Yeah, and I mean, it's sort of like, why are we doing this? Just because that's the way it's always been done.
That's the way it's always been done.
Yeah, there's no sort of questioning it. Really.
And there's a strange horror in that, isn't there?
Oh yeah.
There's strange horror in tradition.
People do horrible things in the name of tradition. People do great things. Yeah. But you don't. The whole point of tradition is we do it because we do it. Yeah. That's the end of it. Yeah. You know, no explanation. Yeah. That can be creepy.
Yeah. There was also one of my favourite folk tales of all time, which is a story that my mum used to... Mum, if you're watching, love you. She used to read me maybe like 3 or 4 times, but I remember it so vividly. And it was a children's book, but it's based on stone soup, which is an old pagan tale, like European, pagan, Slavic as well, but there are different interpretations. And it's basically, the whole point of it is an allegory of how one person can exploit a community. And so it's about a drifter, like a kind of like a bum, a hobo, like moving his way around town. And he goes up to an old lady who lives in a cottage out in the woods, and he knocks on the door and he said, "I'd love to stay the night, and in return I'll make you stone soup."
I think I've heard this one, yeah.
And she says, "Stone soup, what's that?" And he pulls out the stone, he says, puts it in the pot, fills it with water, and says, "Stone soup, this is it, but we're going to need a few little garnishes for it to be better." And slowly he gets her to get some carrots from a garden and then some potatoes, and in the end she provides all the ingredients for the soup, but because he's delivered the stone, he's swindled her out of a meal.
Right, okay. But just because you called it stone soup.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I kind of wanted, so I just love that myth anyway. I think it's fantastic.
That's really good.
And I wanted to subvert that and almost kind of like lay the foundations of an entire tradition based around, perhaps this may be a bit crazy, but perhaps the woman who was swindled by the drifter, perhaps her line, her ancestry, had never forgotten the swindle.
Yeah.
And they wanted
or they remembered perhaps for generations, but then the practice took over and they sort of they passed out of living memory, which is what traditions are.
Yeah.
People have a tendency to sort of do stuff because at one point it might have been the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Might have saved your life, but not anymore, but they still do it and stuff. It reminds me a little bit of that. There's that story that was going around online. I'm not sure if it's like 100% true or not, but just talking about how people get conditioned to do things even if they don't understand why. And it was talking about like those 10 chimpanzees in a room.
Yes.
And they put a step ladder up to the sprinkler, and after a while, one of the chimpanzees goes up and sets the sprinkler off, like accidentally sets it off, and it comes down. All the chimpanzees are screaming because it's gone off. And they take one of those original chimpanzees out and put a new one that wasn't in that room. And after a while, that new chimpanzee goes up, and halfway up the ladder, all the rest of them start howling, and the other one goes down. It doesn't understand why. And they take another one of the originals out, and they put a new one in, and that new one, same thing, and they all start howling, and the first new one starts howling too. And then they do that, and eventually you've got 10 new chimps, and none of them saw the water, but they're all howling because that's what tradition almost is,
crazy.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that could be something like that. Like they just know they have to kill someone, like,
and then eat them.
And eat them. They don't know why, but maybe the first one was just revenge on that man, and then they did it again the next year to his uncle or something, and then it was just became a local guy they would just kill. Yeah,
now it's the late 2000s.
Peak District is lovely, by the way.
Peak District is a beautiful place. Don't let that put you off.
I feel like all my American Canadians are like, I'm never going to the Peak District.
The Peak District is beautiful.
Yeah.
But beware of a family offering you soup.
Score is 8.1. Yeah.
That's my highest. Is that my highest? Yeah.
I think it's your highest. Yeah. I think that's my favourite story of yours so far.
Thank you, man.
Yeah.
I think it's my favourite story of yours.
Yeah. It was. I also just loved how. It just felt polished. Mm-hmm. It felt polished. There were no real loose ends. I do like questions, but there was just like a little.
I felt like I answered a lot of questions in that one.
Yeah. It was just enough mystery, but it felt like, something you could just. Something that I could. It's a story that I could retell now to someone.
Yeah.
Obviously not as well as you.
Yeah.
But that's what I really like about it. Is it does remind me of an old folk tale.
Yeah.
It's just you've eloquently stretched it out to like 2,000 words or whatever.
Thanks, man.
But it's not. Some of the stories we write, you might be like, down to this great story about this, but you might miss out that whole bit. How with that character or this or whatever, because it's But that was just a sort of scary Hansel and Gretel type story. Yeah.
That's exactly what I think.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, man.
It's okay. If you like that.
If you did like that, or if you were completely and utterly repulsed by it, still, same thing, really. Yeah.
Let us know.
Let us know.
And if you're inspired by it, make sure you send in your own stories to this email right here.
We did speak about doing a bit of housekeeping. I think perhaps this episode's maybe gone a little bit too long to kind of address that, but we will be having a housekeeping live stream very shortly. We kind of want to sit down, we want to talk to you guys person to person, ha Noah to ha Noah. That's an awful.
Noah's Ark.
we kind of want to lay out our plans. We've got some great, exciting ideas that we want to do to kind of diversify that way that you and I and Danny and I can engage.
Yeah,
as an audience.
I think we should do that. We're going to do a live stream maybe next week, if not the week after. But we'll title it Housekeeping, so you know that this is the one where we announce all the new plans. We've got so many things that we're going to be doing soon. Some of them we don't even know yet. But it's all coming soon. Thank you so much for watching.
Thank you so much. Usually we blow the fire out, but I wish we had a bit of soup to pour on it. Well, it's funny you should have said that. I haven't got